All right, so let's take a look at how we can model this NES controller using the new Boolean modifier in Max 2024. So if you don't have Max 2024, you won't be able to do this tutorial the way I'm doing it, although you can still use the compound objects here using Pro Boolean or Boolean tools in Max 2023 and below. So let's get started. So let's first create this main shape here. So I'm just going to go into my front view, my top view, and let's just create this basic shape. And I don't really have a height reference here, so I'm just going to gauge an eyeball how high this thing should be. So I think roughly that high should be fine. We can adjust this later if we wanted to. So I'm just going to center this into my z-axis just by right-clicking the transform box down here. And I think this should serve as a pretty good starting point for our base controller. So just going back into top view, there's a number of things that we have to do here. So there's this square piece here for each button, and then each cylindrical button itself. There's this area here that houses the select and start buttons, and the D-pad, of course. And then this larger overall shape here that sort of fits inside this panel here. And then you got this sort of cutout, and you can't see it in this reference image, but there's a split running around the whole controller, which we can put in. So let's start off with these two buttons. So let's go to our creation tab and let's make a box. So something like that. Let's align this in our perspective view. Okay. And whilst we're here, let's duplicate this for the other button as well. So let's take a look at the Boolean modifier in Max. So I'm going to place this onto this base mesh here. So let's make sure that's highlighted. Let's go to our Modifier tab. You can click that up here or press 1 on the keyboard. And let's open up the modifier list. Just type B for Boolean and it should be towards the top. There's a few things that we can do here. First, we have our operandants: union, intersect, subtract, split, merge, attach, and insert. So union will combine the two things together. Intersect will keep the overlapping volumes of our two Boolean pieces. Subtract will subtract the piece from the main mesh. Split will insert new edges based on the object along the intersection. So just sort of this line here that intersects the base mesh. Merge will combine the two objects together without really removing anything. So it's kind of just like attaching something together in 3ds Max. Attach will combine multiple objects into one without affecting their topology. And insert subtracts the bounding shapes of the last operation, which is this one here, from this one here, leaving the shape of this unaffected. So just have a play around with it. There's a lot you can do here, which is awesome, and a lot you can sort of create. So down here we have our operandants list. This is where all our operations will be, so we can sort of change and move things around, which is really good. So it's quite um, non-destructive, which is very max, which is awesome. This little icon here just shows you what operations you used on that particular mesh. And then we have some more advanced things like display and options here for the material used. So if you have a material on a particular object and you, let's say, subtract, let's say this object is wood, and then this object is some sort of metal, and you use a subtract, you can retain the metal in the place or in the section that is subtracted, which is pretty neat. A really cool feature here is the method. So now we have mesh and OpenVDB. So mesh is exactly how you would what you would expect. It just uses a polygon method to generate a mesh, basically. The VDB though is really cool because it allows you to create a volume of your object here. So it allows you to create more organic shapes, I think, which is pretty interesting. And I think there's many use cases for this OpenVDB option, especially if you're creating more organic sort of looking shapes. I think that's a really neat feature. So let's get started with this. So we're creating this raised piece here. So I'm just going to unionize these two objects just by going to my base mesh, my Boolean modifier, and going to union. I'm going to add these two guys together, and I can also adjust these later. So if they're not the right height, which they're not, it's okay because I can always go back into my operandins list here. I can even control click these two objects and adjust the height, which is great. So it should be a lot deeper, though it's not because we haven't got this initial cutout here. So what I'm going to do is go into my top view and create another box here just for this cutout. So let's go back to the Create tab and create a box. And this one won't be too high. So I can go back in here to my Modifier tab and adjust the height. So I think something like that. I don't want it too deep as well, so something fairly shallow. And what I'm going to do is just copy this because I think I might need it for later. So I'm just going to clone this by right clicking and going to clone and cloning that object. Although I'm going to right click and just hide the selection at the moment. So what I can do in my base mesh, I can go to subtract and subtract this object here. Great, so we've got this box here and these two boxes that we made earlier. Now what I want to do is drag these two boxes below this box 2, which is the biggest one. So that, maybe I need to drag it up. So what happens is that this box 2, and I should rename this, so I can right click, rename operandins, and I'm going to name this, let's say, large box, so I don't get confused, and rename this one button base B. Let's copy that, rename the other one, and that one was A, I think. So now that this large box is at the top of the stack, So the stack works top down. These buttons here aren't getting affected by that subtraction. So if I drag that below like it was before, you can see that this button here is, or button base A and B is being subtracted by a large box. We don't want that. We just want the base mesh to be affected. So I just need to drag this above button base A and B. All right, so now I can adjust this and bring that lower. And it probably is going to be flush with this line here. So I'm just going to bring that down until it's roughly about that height. And if we want to make fine adjustments, we can zoom right on in and just adjust this. Great. Okay, I think that will do. Great. So let's get the other pieces in. So we've got this box here that we want. So I'm going to go into my Create tab and create a box for this. I'm just going to rough that out slightly. And I'm going to put that into position. And I think it's probably going to be at the same height as this. So what we can do, instead of trying to eyeball it every single time, we can flip this around. So the pivot point is at the base of this cube. You can see that there. What I can do is just go to my rotate tool, which is E on the keyboard. Make sure I have angle snaps toggled, which is A on the keyboard, and just rotate this 180. And what I can do here in my snap tool, which is S on the keyboard, I'm just going to make sure that I have it selected to vertex and go to the options tab and make sure enable axis constraint is turned on. And that will allow me to snap that exactly to the right height, as you can see here. And I might do the same for these other ones as well. So I'm going to go back into my Boolean button A and B. So let's rotate that 180. So there. And let's snap that to the top. Button A, let's rotate that again, 180. And I'm looking at the transform box down here. That's how I know I'm doing exactly 180. Great. So all we need to do here with this one is just union that to the base object. So let's press union. Let's apply that. So the next piece would be this part that houses the D-pad. So let's get that in. We're going to do a little bit of modeling here. So we probably just want to model this part here. And I might bring that over a little bit. Make sure you turn your snaps off. And let's add a couple of edit polys here. I'm just going to drag this down, and the image is a perspective image, so it's not going to be exactly correct on either side. So you just got to make your best guess. I think that should be fine. And what I'm going to do is just grab these corners here, or these sides, and I'm just isolating this object by pressing Alt Q, or the button for it is down here. And I'm just going to extrude that out. Right, so back to my top view, I'm going to right click and go to extrude, but I'm going to use the settings here and extrude by local normal. That will allow me to extrude each polygon face in its current direction. Oops, in this case though, sorry, not local normal, by polygon. Alright, so that looks pretty good. So I'm going to press OK to that. And I know I need 2 of these to get this sort of inner shape. So I might clone this out. Or before I do this, I could go into, before I added that first edit poly, is to create the inner shape first and then the outer shape. So let's jump down to this first edit poly. And I should be able to edit this and it should adjust procedurally. So you can see the edit poly at the top is where we did that extrude. So this edit poly below, I should be able to just grab the vertices and move them around, and the top edit poly should adjust. Oops. Okay, so I'm just going to turn this top edit poly off now. And I'm going to rough out that center D-pad shape and turn my edit poly back on. It should update. Okay, so let's get a finer adjustment here. Great. So with that made, I'm just going to move that up, and I'm going to flip this 180 as well. And I'm going to snap that to the top there. What I'm going to do is just clone this object by right clicking and going to clone. And I want a copy of this. And I want to make sure that it is bored out to this outer rim here. So I'm just going to make adjustments to this shape a little bit. Just to make sure that it's correct. So it looks like the original one needs a bit more editing. So I'm going to Control Z until I get to this point here and go back to my edit poly and bring that back a little bit. Okay. Let's try that again. Rotate that, and let's snap that to the top there. So it's not going to be exactly, whoops, it looks like I had it in the right direction already. Okay, so that will do. Let's just copy this. I'm going to clone this, make a copy, and what I'm going to do is just scale this out a little bit. Just like that. And I'm going to make adjustments to the top here. So I might be able to do all of it at once. Nope. So let's just scale in the Y by grabbing these tops and bottom sections, and the left and right, let's scale in the X. Great. So I've got these two pieces here now. What I'm going to do is rename this as outer D-pad. Great. And we have the inner D-pad, which is over here. D-pad. Great. So let's grab our base mesh now, and let's unionize the outer. So let's press union and click the outer, and then what we want to do is subtract the inner. Great, so that's how we get that little shape here. Now let's move on to creating this shape in the middle. I think this might be easy enough just to do manually, although we can just probably get another box here and then to get this shape through the Boolean method. So let's go to our top view. Let's grab a box, and what I'm going to do is just grab that inner sort of radius dimensions there, and let's move that up. get that in place. So let's take a look at this shape. So it sort of goes out and it's got this rounded sort of corner here. So to get that, all we have to do is just sort of extrude in, I think. So we can round the edges off and then extrude downwards and then merge the vertices together to get that sort of point there. I think that might be the easiest way to do it. I could be wrong. There could be an easier way to do it, but that's how I'm going to do it. So I may as well do that. So I'm going to move this up a little bit. I'm going to add 2 edit polys on top. And using my edge selection, I'm going to grab these vertical edges that go up. And I'm just going to chamfer them off. So I'm just going to right click, go to chamfer, use the options, and let's increase the amount here. So I'm going to go to my top view so I can sort of get an idea of what this might look like. So let's increase the amount to about there, I think. And 4 segments looks pretty good. Okay. Let's press OK to that. And let's go to our polygon selection. I'm just going to isolate this piece here. Let's grab this bottom face and let's extrude downwards. And let's give that a little scale inwards. So what we can do, because we'll work on an inner shape here, let's just merge these vertices together. So what I'm going to do here is go back to my polygon selection, press Control and click Vertex to convert that to a vertex selection. Right click and let's go to World. Let's use the options here. Let's increase that till they all snap. Great. And now all we have to do is sort of scale outwards on these side polygons to match the reference image. So I'm just going to scale out there and then in the X as well. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And then let's just move this down a little bit to penetrate that shape there. So I'm going to come into here and use the subtract operand. Get that look. Okay, I think that looks pretty good. I'm not too sure how deep this is, but I think for now that looks pretty decent. Great. So let's round some of these edges off. I think it might be a good time to do that. So there's a couple ways we can do this. I think we can just add a chamfer modifier. So if we add a chamfer modifier on top, it should chamfer our Boolean selections or our edges on our Boolean objects as well. So we can go into here and reduce the amount to something a bit more manageable, like this. We can change the mirroring options here to any of these. I think radial will work quite nicely for this. So we don't want too much. We just want a nice sort of rounded edge. So I'm going to increase the segment count maybe by 1 or 2. I think 1 looks pretty good. And there's a little bit of shading error here. So in the smooth output, I'm just going to change that from entire object to the chamfered pieces only. So that should help fix that. Or you can play with the threshold here to just adjust that. Right, so we can increase the amount. 1 or 2 to get a particular look. Or we can manually do chamfering in particular areas as opposed to the whole thing at once. So this looks pretty nice, although you'll notice that it's not exactly how we want it to be. So it's not matching up with the reference image as nicely as it could. So we can do this manually. So I'm just going to delete that. What we can do is we can still access these objects here, even though they're Boolean objects. We can still access them and apply modifiers to them as per usual, which is great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with the box first. So let's go to our modifier stack and click box. And then on top of box, we can add an edit poly. And what we can do here is then go into our edge selection and select the edges that we want for our chamfering operation, which will pretty much be all the outer edges. And then on the inner edges here, we can create a, we can do that afterwards, after the Boolean method, because right now we're below the edit poly stack. So let's grab all of these edges. We can grab the whole lot actually, just like that. And we can go to our chamfer options here and apply a chamfer to that. So I'm going to increase the amount to reflect the reference image. And give it a segment of 2 maybe. You can see what these other ones look like. I think uniform will be fine for this example. And press OK to that. So we've got that nice rounded edge here. And then on these pieces that we've Booleaned already, what we can do is select them in the operands list. So large button A, we can select that here, and you will see we now have access to that in our modifier stack. So we can click that, and let's take a look in top view. Let's add a chamfer. So we can either add a chamfer modifier or an edit poly. I think I'll do it in the edit poly. And just grab these vertical edges here. Okay, it's a bit hard to see. And let's increase the amount there. Great. Let's increase the segment count. Let's press OK to that. And what I want to do here is also have a small chamfer running along the top as well. So I should be able to just double click this line here and add a chamfer to that. Looks like that's not working, so let's just go to our front view and let's grab all of those lines there and then minus the vertical lines in that selection. And then what we can do is just reduce the amount to give it a nice small rounded edge, so it's not such a sharp corner. Great, so that looks pretty good. I'm happy with that. What I want to do here now is do the same to the other side. So I might be able to just copy this edit poly because the object is pretty much the same. So I'm going to right click and copy. Go to the Boolean modifier and go to button base B. Select the box and right click and paste. And it looks like that's worked, which is great. So all I have to do here is fix up this one. So let's go to box, Boolean, and what I want to do is grab this box here and go to the box in the modifier stack, and then add an edit poly on top. Okay, so just going to the top view here, I'm just going to grab these corners and just minus the selections that I don't need. And then that should be right. The highlight isn't coming up, so it's a little bit hard to see. You might be able to toggle this off, and that doesn't seem to help, but you just gotta, I guess, know what you're selecting. So let's go to our chamfer options here, increase the amount to make that fit the reference image. I'm going to increase the segment count by 2, and that looks pretty good to me. And like with the other side, I'm going to give a little chamfering to the top as well. So let's highlight that edge. So it might not highlight the whole edge like it did with the other one. So let's just see. Okay, so let's do that selection that we made earlier again, where we highlight the whole object like that. And then what we can do is just deselect by holding down Alt the parts that we don't need, which is pretty much all the vertical edges and that the bottom edges as well. So let's just reduce that amount. So we want something similar here. Okay, that looks pretty close. So about 1.15. Great. Now let's do the same for the D-pad. So we have our box, and we want the outer. And then we already have an edit poly here, so we can use that already. And then what we can do is just highlight, well, we probably just want the outer part here. And we can do all these other bits separately. So let's grab all of that. Control click these parts. Then the bottom and top. And what I'm going to do is hold down Alt and deselect all those center pieces on either side. All right, so back to the top view. Let's go to chamfer. And let's increase the chamfer amount. Looks like we don't need these pieces. And this piece here. Great. So something like that for this piece. So let's press apply. Now there's a larger sort of chamfer on the insides here. So we got to do that afterwards, after we've Boolean this piece out. But we can do a little chamfer here because there should be one. So let's do that now. I'm going to grab that edge there and the other side. Great, back to my top view. And this one's going to be a much tighter chamfer, so I'm going to reduce the segments down to 1 and reduce that all the way down. Okay, so great, that looks good to me. And let's press OK to that. Great. So that's the start of our controller. Let's get these buttons in and then we'll finish the rest off a little bit later. All right, so let's go to our modify, our create tab, and let's create a cylinder. So roughly that sort of radius. Let's position that in place. If we want it directly in the center here, we can use our snap tools. So let's open this up by right clicking, and we can change it from vertex to midpoint over here. So what we can do is then snap to any sort of midpoint. So making sure that we had the Y and X axes snap to the midpoint of this square here. Great, so let's increase the side count to something much higher than what we have now. I'm going to increase, I'm going to raise this piece so we can see it. And I'm going to increase this to something fairly high, so maybe 32. So it's nice and smooth on the edge. And this is the outer hole cut out there. And then we'll create the button itself. So we'll probably clone this here. So let's clone this object. I'm going to reduce the height segments to 1. Let's clone this object here. And then let's scale the button itself down. So about that much would do, I think. And then in our base Boolean, we can subtract the outer piece. Great. And then we could union this piece together, although it's a separate button, so I might keep it actually separate. So I'm just going to change that color to gray so it sort of fits in a bit nicer. And I'm just going to scale that down a little bit. And if we wanted to, we can do a little bit of modeling to this. So it has sort of a rounded top here. So let's go to our polygon selection and highlight that top there. And then we can probably pull this down a little bit and right click and use our bevel tool. So we can increase the height there. And there's actually not much of a bevel. So what we probably want to do is do something like this maybe. There might be a better way. But I think this will work. Oops. So like that. And then we can round these edges off by double clicking this loop here. And then we can chamfer this. Give that a larger chamfer so it's nice and rounded. Let's press OK to that. And then what we can do with this button, this polygon in the middle, is bring that in a little bit more. And then we can quad that out if we wanted to. So let's go to the top view and let's see what we can do. So I think we could just do something like this. Although that will work, but I don't think it's the most elegant solution. Probably should have started with a lower poly smooth off cube, and that would have been probably a better thing to do maybe. Alright, so let's just grab all of these polygons here. And then let's go to our edit geometry in edit poly, and then let's just relax these polygons out. Okay, and let's do the same for the next ring. So I just press Control up to grow my selection. Let's just relax that a little bit so it blends in a bit nicer. And I think that will do. There's probably a better way to do that, but that will do for now. So let's go into our poly groups. Let's fix that up. Clear all and give it a 1. And whilst we're here, we may as well just delete this bottom polygon. Great, so that looks pretty good. I think the buttons come out quite a bit, so let's bring that out. And may as well give it this sort of red color. So I think that'll be fine. And then let's shift and drag this across to copy it. And let's make sure that's centered in the midpoint as well. Great. Okay, so all we need to do now is copy that cylinder that we had earlier. So we can go to our base mesh, then we can go to our cylinder over here and copy that across. So hold down Shift to drag a copy. Great. And then the same way we centered that object, we're going to do the same to this copied mesh. So let's just use our snap tools here. Great, so let's take a look at our work so far. I think that's starting to look pretty good. Let's get these start and select buttons in. All right, so let's get this shape in. Let's do one and then just copy it for the other. So I think with this we could use probably a cylinder. So let's use a cylinder for this. Rough out that sort of radius there. I'm going to turn my snaps off for this. And let's take a look at the side counter. So we want something that we can sort of pull off to the right here. So 10, maybe 20 would work nicely for this. So we have a nice smooth edge. 22. So I want it nice and smooth. I'm looking for a flat part at the top and bottom here. So probably 30, I think. All right, so let's add and edit poly. Let's press 1 on the keyboard and then let's grab half of this cylinder and drag that across to make that fit. And if we wanted to, we can sort of scale this down a little bit just to make that fit a little bit nicer. Okay, so that is the hole for our button. So I'm just going to lift that up and sort of scale it down a bit so it's a bit more manageable. What we can do here is clone this object as well. So this will be our button. Will serve as our button as well. We just got to scale that down a little bit. So I'm going to center the pivot point here just by going to the hierarchy tab, going to effect pivot only and center to object. Make sure you turn that off as well. So I'm just going to scale that down a little bit. So I think something like that will probably be fine. And let's go to our base mesh. Let's go to our Boolean modifier, and what we want to do is subtract. So we want to subtract this piece. And I'm not going to add this piece, this button, because I think it's not necessary. So let's just get this button looking more like a button. Okay, so let's do a similar sort of thing to this. So let's go into our polygon selection. Let's right click, go to bevel. Let's use the settings here. Let's increase the height there, not by too much. And something like that. Yeah, that would be fine. And then we can sort of bring this in like that. It's probably a better way to do this. I don't think this is the right way, but I guess it will work. I'm pressing Alt-C for cut just to connect these two vertices together. One more cut. Like I said, I think there's probably a more elegant way to do that, but it will work. So let's grab this outer section here, right click, and let's chamfer that. So let's give it a nice big chamfer to round that off. I think that should be fine. And then what we can do here is go to our vertex selection, front view. Let's grab all of these parts at the top here. And then let's relax that. And let's grab these polygons and fix up the smoothing groups. Delete this bottom part because we don't need it. Great. So let's go to top view and give this a black color. Okay. And I'm going to bring this down to roughly around this height, or in this case up. So I'm just going to eyeball it. So I'm just going to use the top here of that viewport and just bring that up a little bit. Great. That looks good. It's probably a bit too high now that I look at it, so I'm going to bring it down a little bit. And just like what we did here, we just need to copy that button across and just hold down Shift and drag over to the left there. Go into our base mesh, Boolean, and our, this is why we should name things. Let's see, so it was probably this one here, right? Yep. So let's grab that, hold down Shift, and bring that across. Cool. So we're almost done here. So we just got to have we just got to put this D-pad in. And there's a number of pieces here. So there's the D-pad itself, and then there's the little arrows here, and this part in the middle. So we've got to get that in. So let's create the D-pad first. So let's make it a similar sort of way we did the outer sort of shell here. So I'm just going to put a box in the middle. And if we wanted to, we can sort of center it with what we have here. So that might make it look a bit nicer. So let's bring this up a little bit. So let's bring this up and out so we can see what we're doing. And let's add an edit poly. Let's add 2. And let's grab all these side pieces here. And let's extrude that out. So let's extrude by polygon. Go back to the top view to sort of gauge the length or the extrusion height. So about there, I think will be fine. And let's chamfer this before we do any Boolean operations on this. All right, so let's go to our edge selection and let's take a look at what we have. So All right, so let's grab all these vertical edges here. And let's right click, go to chamfer. Let's increase the amount there. And let's add a segment. So I think about there looks pretty good. Could see what these other ones sort of look like. And uniform looks fine. Let's just do that. So let's press OK to that. And then we also want to get the top part here as well. So let's grab that. So let's highlight this whole top part. Deselect the vertical lines by holding down Alt. Go to our top view, and then let's deselect these pieces that we don't need. Cool. Okay, so let's chamfer these as well. So the chamfer on this will be a little bit smaller, I think. So just sort of looking at that, it doesn't look as intense as the vertical pieces. So I think something like that will be fine. Let's check these other ones. I think maybe quad might be good, so we can reduce the tension of that to round that out a bit. Let's see. No. So let's go back to uniform. Great, so I think that looks good. So let's press OK to that. Let's change the color and make that black. And then, actually, let's not make that black now because it's too hard to see. What we can do here is grab a sphere and grab this little hole here. So we can Boolean this piece. So let's go to our sphere here. I might use, well, we can use a sphere, that's fine. Let's just do that. So let's increase that roughly about that size. And I'm using something pretty dense, so 64 I think would be good. We can always change that later, so it doesn't really matter. So let's go to our D-pad here and add a Boolean modifier. And then what we want to do is subtract that sphere. Great, so it looks great. And then we can add these arrows here. So let's just model that in. So let's just start off with a box. And then let's add a edit poly on top. Oops. So what I want to do is select just this face that's facing away from us, so this part here. And then what we can do is just extrude out. Put a center line here by highlighting these edges, pressing Control Shift E for connect. Then we can pull this back and out. So we can right click our snapping tools, select vertex, and then we can snap to this vertex here. So we get a shape like that. Probably want to connect this up somehow. So I think we still have our midpoint selection. So I do want to probably grab my cutting tool and just connect this up maybe. just so we don't have a flat, this sort of flat edge. I think that's probably not a good idea. Or what we could do is get rid of this, Control backspace, and then we can let's just keep that in. Yeah, so I think that will work fine. If not, we can always change it. So let's bring this shape up. And let's sit that in. And it looks like from the reference image is a cutout. So let's cut this piece out so we can add a chamfer modifier to this before we cut it out. We need to reduce the amount quite a bit here. Give it a segment of 2. And just looking at the reference, that looks pretty good. I might scale this up a little bit. Okay, just like that. All right. So I think that looks pretty good. I think with this shape here, the base mesh, I'm going to get this sphere and just make sure that was centered. I don't know if I did that or not. So I'm just going to quickly center that. And then with this arrow that we just made, I want to copy this across so we can add an array modifier to this. So let's go to modifier, add array, and we need 4 of these. And we want to change that to a radial array. Like that. And we can center this object here the same way we've been doing all these other centering, just using the midpoint. Okay, snapping that to the midpoint of this D-pad. And then we can reduce the radius here. Right, so let's reduce the radius to fit. Okay, so I'm basing the arrows off this point here, not these points, because remember the reference image is not an orthographic image, and also the D-pad is off-center because it's probably old and used. So let's grab the D-pad now, and then let's add this these arrows here. So let's subtract these arrows. Now the arrows disappeared because I didn't actually have them inside the mesh itself, but they are here. So what we can do is highlight the arrows in the operands and then just bring them down and just see that sort of work live. Which looks cool. We can sort of change the display here, right? So we can just see the results if it's in the way. So we still have that highlighted, which is great. So I think something like that will be fine. I think this sphere here is too deep, so we need to bring that out a bit. And I think we can have that wider but shallower by just scaling this down in the Z, sorry, and then just bring that down a little bit more. All right. So I think something like that works pretty good. Great. So let's grab this piece here now and let's just slot that in. And I think something like that will work fine. So let's change the color of that to a black color. I think that looks So we'll leave it there for now. That's basically the Boolean modifier in Max. It's really, really powerful. It's new to 2024, so you have to have 2024 to do this. The old Boolean modifiers are still here. You just got to go to create tab, compound objects, and it's a pro Boolean, and even pro cutter is a type of Boolean. So they're all there. You can still use them. You can still achieve this style of results just by using these older Booleans. Although having it inside the modifier and as a modifier itself proves to be very, very useful.